So, I got to find interesting insights, things that, over the past years may not have been repeated. So, but you know what? That leads to learning definitely very, very interesting insights and takes, and I'm excited to share with you guys. So hopefully you'll enjoy it as much as I found it interesting. Let's give it another minute. David Schneider, it's nice to see you. Wave. All right. Let's get ready to rumble. Parasha Balak. Someone has a question? No. All right. Parasha Balak. Let's just give a general overview of the Parasha. Balak is a Moab king, and he summons a prophet named Bilam, and he wants to curse the people of Israel. He wants to curse the Jewish people. And we have the incident of Balaam traveling on a donkey. And we'll get into that a little bit about how the donkey is not just the detail in the story, but it actually might be the entire key to the entire existence of Judaism. We'll get into that a little bit. And the donkey actually is the one that interacts with the angel that blocks the ways. And make a small, to continue the story, Balaam gets to his vantage point and he is cursing the Jewish people. But whatever he does, every time he curses, blessings issue from his mouth. And his curses turn to blessing. And now, ultimately, at the end, the Torah says that he prophesizes about the coming of Mashiach, the end of the days, the coming of Mashiach. To continue on the story in regards to the Moab nation, a lot of the Jewish people fall to the temptation and charm of the Moabi women, which led them to be enticed by the worship of idol worship. And then there's the famous story of one of the Jewish leaders. His name was Zimri, who takes a Moabi princess and confronts Moses with what seems to be like a serious question, only to have Pinchas, the zealot, rise up and kill them both while they were being intimate with each other. And this stopped the plague that was ravaging the entire nation. So this is something that I'm sure some of you have heard. It's probably one of the most classic questions in this week's Torah portion. We're not going to dwell on it because I assume that it has been covered, and I would like to put the time and energy into a different subject at hand. But there's a question in regards to the whole episode of Zimri. One second. Let's make sure everyone's muted. I'm hearing myself a little bit. Not sure if it's from me. Yeah, much better. All right. So there's a classic question that arises in the whole story of the leader of one. His name was Zimri, who takes this Moabi princess and comes and confronts Moses. And basically, his question and his complaint was: we know that Moses married Zipporah, who is a daughter of, at that time, of a nation, a Moavi nation that served idol worship. Yisrael was known to be her father Jethro, before his, being taken by the Jewish people and by God. He was a big idol worshiper. Some say that, I think Rashi comments that he was an expert in the field. He tried every single form of idol worship there was. And Zimri's question to Moses was that Moses and God tells them that the Moavi women that are not Jewish are forbidden. They're forbidden to be taken by any of the men. How can Moses, the leader of the Jewish people, his own wife is a Moavi woman? That's very, 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 that's a big contradiction. To which Moses doesn't retort, doesn't give any answer. But we're going to get into that for a few minutes. And the question is, was Zimri an idiot? Was his question legitimized? Did he not think for a few minutes? What was he really, really asking? How could Moses, before the Torah was given, there was the Hebrews, and we were all Noahide descendants, but the acceptance as a Jewish people didn't exist yet. The Torah wasn't accepted yet with all its laws. So why Zimri should have assumed that there was no rules before the Torah was given, and therefore Moses was able to take Zipporah as a wife. And then after the Torah was given, Zipporah, together with Moses and Jethro and the entire Jewish people, went through quote unquote conversion to acceptance as a Jewish people. And therefore he was permitted to her. Zimri was trying to do was take a Moavi woman after the Torah clearly stated not to. So obviously Zimri wasn't so, as a leader himself of individuals, he wasn't so naive. He wasn't not thinking. His real question was that some say that Moses was a Kohen. And we know that a Kohen, there's a different set of rules, being the spiritual nature of a Kohen and the different parts of the temple that they have to deal with. They have to, at the end of the day, they're not allowed to marry someone that is a convert. They're not allowed to marry someone who's a convert, because a convert, even though we know that a convert has a certain higher level in the fact that they chose conversion than that of someone that was born Jewish, but at the same time, being that their heritage and their ancestry were steeped in idol worship, there is a certain level of, I'm not sure what the word uses, but the Kohen is not allowed to marry them. So Zimri's question was on the fact that Moses was a Kohen, right? The fact that Moses was a Kohen makes things complicated in regards to someone that was even a convert, right? If you want to say that Zipporah converted with everyone else, that makes things complicated. So the answer which is given, and this is quoted in the Gemara, is that what Zimri was mistaken, his question was legit in a way, but what he was mistaken in regard to this whole process of a Kohen was that at the end of the day, the fact that Moses and Zipporah were wed before the giving of the Torah and was before the concept of a Kohen existed, meaning the status of a Kohen didn't formally exist in a proper form till the Torah was given with all the laws that pertain to the priest, that pertain to the Kohen. So even though Moses ends up becoming a Kohen, so the same logic as before, just a little bit deeper, the fact that his transition to becoming a priest and Kohen didn't formally take full effect till after the Torah was given, so therefore he was betrothed. The key was that he was married to her before the Torah was given. So when the status gets officially accepted and the Jewish people become officially Jewish people, so therefore, being that he's already married from a legal perspective from before the Torah was given, so nevertheless, that status goes for their marriage. It's considered a good marriage. There are other opinions say that Zimri was correct, and actually Moses technically was maybe allowed to live with Zipporah, but because he didn't want anyone asking any questions or trying to infer any questions later on the generations, he actually was divorced. But at the end of the day, when it's all said and done, Moses didn't object to any of this for two reasons. One opinion maintains that he simply was a humble person. He was a humble person. We know throughout history that if you want the definition of humbleness is Moses, and he didn't want to make a big deal and say that, you have to assume that leaders make the right decisions, especially someone that was so connected to God. And Moses didn't want to get into an interaction. He was waiting for someone else to answer, which before anyone else could really answer, Pinchas goes ahead and kills Zimri and the Moavi princess. And another explanation says that Moses simply forgot. Moses simply forgot, and the reason why he forgot was similar logical reasoning, that if the leader, it's quoted, I forgot where in the Medrash, that a leader should not invoke status in regards to answering questions. He should better wait for someone else. So Moses, it's kind of humbleness, but it's more of a direct lesson that a leader doesn't want to show that they're better than anyone, that they're different than anyone, that they're elevated than anyone, and shouldn't invoke different answers that pertain to their status. So therefore, it's kind of similar to the first answer. So therefore, he didn't answer Moses. So that's that. A little insight to that episode. But what I want to get into today is the story of Bilam and the, one second. My computer's freezing up on me. Is everyone with me on Zoom still? David Schneider, can I get a heads up? All right, so we're still good on the Zoom end. All right, it is what it is. So what I want to get into today is something which I think is, something might not have been mentioned before, something that's unique. I definitely never heard of it before, is the story and the part of the story with Bilam and his donkey. We know that there's the phenomenon of the talking donkey, but in reality, after we learn what we're about to learn, it could be that this detail in this episode of the donkey is really the main story of this week's Torah portion, and not just this Torah portion. Its lesson is something that could be the foundation of the whole Torah altogether, which is something wild, and I'm very excited to get into. So first, let's read inside. I'm going to read inside in the English a little bit of the story, what happened with Bilam and the donkey. So Balak tells Bilam, go and curse the Jewish people. Now I'm going to continue reading. This is chapter 22, verse 21. In the morning, Balaam arose, saddled his donkey, and went with the Moabi dignitaries. God's wrath flared because he was going, and an angel of the Lord stationed himself on the road to thwart him. And he was riding his donkey, and 2 servants were with him. The donkey saw the angel of the Lord stationed on the road with his sword drawn in his hand, and the donkey went off the road and into the field. But Bilam beats the donkey in order for it to get back on the road. He doesn't see the angel. The angel of the Lord stood in the path of the vineyards with a fence on his side and a fence on the other side. The donkey again sees the angel of Hashem and pressed against the wall, and ended up pressing against Bilam's leg against the wall, and he got upset and he beat the donkey again. The angel of the Lord continued going ahead. He stood in a narrow place where there was no room to turn right and no room to turn left. The donkey stuck. The donkey saw the angel of the Lord and crouched down under Bilam. Bilam gets angry and beats the donkey with a stick. And the Lord opened the mouth of the donkey, and the donkey tells Bilam, what have I done to you that you have struck me these 3 times? Balaam tells the donkey, for you have humiliated me. You keep going off the road for no reason. If I had a sword in my hand, I would kill you right now. The donkey says to Bilam, am I not the donkey which you have ridden since you first started this trip until now? Have I been accustomed to do this to you? He says no. And the Lord ends up opening Balaam's eyes, and he saw the angel, and he bowed and prostrated himself. So that's the general idea. That's the general part of the story that we're going to focus on. Let's get into a second. We have a donkey. We have Bilam riding the donkey. What I want to mention, which is something that the Gemara and Avodah Zarah mentions, is that this part of the story where Bilam just magically ends up going on a donkey and is not something random. Bilam and the donkey actually have a very, very serious and deep relationship. And I'm going to read the Gemara in Avodah Zarah. The Gemara, The Gemara in Avodah Zarah states that the donkey and Bilam are having this conversation. And how the conversation goes is that the people are asking Bilam, why are you taking a donkey? The idea of taking donkeys, even though it's mentioned in the Torah a few times, was not something so common in that time. People took horses. And if taking a donkey was considered inferior to that of a horse. So people are asking Balaam, why are you taking a donkey? Why are you not taking a horse? And the Gemara relates that Balaam told them that my horse is resting and needs to rest and needs to graze the field. He was embarrassed that he was taking a donkey for the reason that we're going to say. But so I end up having to take a donkey. I end up having to take a donkey because because I'm letting my horse rest. And the donkey gets offended. The donkey says, I hear you telling people that you're just taking me because you need to give your horse a rest. But don't you ride on me all the time? And the donkey said something very interesting. The quote that the Gemara says, you ride me by day, and then you're my companion by night. And the Talmud explains that Balaam was actually physically intimate with the donkey. That's how serious their relationship was, their connection was. I know it's a little bit gross, but that's what the Gemara relates. And the donkey was offended by this, the fact that Balaam was embarrassed of the donkey. So now that we have a little bit of an understanding about the relationship, and we're starting to realize that the story of Balaam and the donkey has maybe a little bit more of a significance behind it, let's go back to the time in Torah where the original time where the donkey is mentioned. So where the original time the donkey is mentioned is regards to Abraham, Avram Avinu, and the binding of Isaac. We know that Avraham saddled up a donkey with different materials to build the altar from which that he was going to sacrifice Isaac on. This is the very, very first time the Torah mentions the idea of riding a donkey. Another time the Torah mentions the idea of riding a donkey is in regards to Moses. Moses takes a donkey, puts his wife and his sons on it, and it goes from Midian to Egypt in order to free the Jewish people. Rashi comments that there's going to be a third time when riding on the donkey is going to be a prominent moment in Jewish history, and that is when Mashiach is going to come. Mashiach is going to enter, look like a poor man riding a donkey. We see that throughout Jewish history, three prominent eras, three prominent figures, Abraham, Moses, and the God willing Mashiach, are all going to be traveling on it. They're all traveled on a donkey, or God willing will be traveling on a donkey. So again, this idea of Balaam and a donkey and traveling is more and more taking bigger significance and center stage, and has within it a deeper meaning and understanding than just a detail. So there explains, and the Maharal kind of disputes this idea, but the Medrash explains that this donkey is the same donkey from Abraham till Mashiach, the same donkey. And in fact, this donkey was passed down through each and every generation. And the Medrash starts off, and I'm going to read the Medrash inside. Abraham was entrusted with the donkey. Then he took the donkey and he gave it to Isaac. Isaac gave it to Jacob. Jacob gave it to his son Levi. And why did he give it to his son Levi? He gave it to his son Levi because we knew that the Levium, the Levites, they lived off the tithes from all the other tribes. So he needed the donkey to go around and collect all the different sources of income and food in order to survive. The Levites were ones that were holy ones. They sat and learned all day. They didn't have any source of supporting themselves. So they used to get a fraction of each and other tribes. And so Levi, who gave it to Kahas, who's his son, who's also a Levite, they used it for the same reason. And Kahas gave it to Amram, who's Moses' father, and Amram gave it to Moses. And this is the donkey that Moses takes to redeem the people from Egypt. And then this donkey, which is going to be ridden when Mashiach's going to come, it says that when Moses passed away on his mountain, which we don't know exactly where that mountain is, that his burial place was hidden from us, the donkey ascended and is waiting to come back when Mashiach is going to come, and the donkey is going to be used for Mashiach. That's what the Medrash states. It's the same donkey throughout history, which again is strengthening the very fact that this donkey and the idea of a donkey in Torah is not some random animal, some random not kosher animal that the Torah uses as a method of transportation, but it bears extreme, extreme, extreme significance. Now the Maharal, which the Maharal I think is 1700, I believe, a very, very famous, one of the most famous rabbis. Story of the Golem takes place in the times of the Maharal of Prague. He says that the idea of the donkey doesn't mean actually the physical donkey living thousands and thousands of years. It says it's different donkeys every time, but the idea of this donkey and definitely the spiritual significance of this donkey is the same. So for everyone that has the question of how could a donkey live thousands and thousands of years, obviously we don't question God, but the Maharal takes maybe a more practical approach. Yes, miracles happen, but specifically in regards to this donkey, it doesn't mean that it was the same physical donkey that now has a long beard and is waiting to come when Mashiach's going to come. It's the different donkeys every time, but the significance of the donkey and those donkeys that pertain to those people that rid on those donkeys is the same. So before we get into the answer, not even the answer, we're not finishing forming the question, but I just want to mention a very interesting insight on the fact that it's known and that it's said that Abraham was the very first person to ride on a donkey. The idea of riding on a donkey was introduced to the world by Abraham, and the Medrash explains that how do we know this is because if you take the word Avram and you take the word Chamar, they have the same numerical value of 248. So Avraham is 248. Chamar, which is a donkey, is 248. And that is the way that you know that Avram was the very, very first person to ever saddle up a donkey. Just an interesting observation. We see multiple times in Talmud when the discussions of Mashiach take place through the different dreams and visions or meetings or discussions, that the fact of the part of Mashiach where the donkey is taking, the Mashiach to come and to redeem the Jewish people is repeated and repeated and repeated and discussed. When there's the discussion, is it going to be on clouds and so on and so forth? The fact that we don't let up on the fact that this donkey is going to be the one taking Mashiach is stressed numerous times in tractate Sanhedrin and tractate Brachos, many different places where it discusses this idea of Mashiach as the donkey mentioned. A practical answer why a donkey takes, a special importance takes a special importance in regards to being the one that was carrying these famous Jewish figures, Abraham, Moses, and ultimately Mashiach, is because it said that donkeys were so vital in regards to carrying the people out of Egypt. And being that God is transcendent, past, present, and future, God foresaw that the donkey was going to be very involved in the Exodus. So therefore, Torah has a special place. Nowhere else in Torah does it mention the idea of a non-kosher animal in regards to any significance whatsoever. Yet we know that the donkey, not only did we mention the donkey in regards to various different stories in Jewish history, we mentioned the donkey that there's a special commandment to give the firstborn of the donkey. That's how big of a significance the donkey has in Jewish life. And again, one of the reasons given was that God foresaw and the donkeys playing an integral part in carrying the possessions of the Jewish people out of Egypt. So therefore, the donkey holds a special place. Now, that is a very more or less a simple, easy answer. But what I read and what I studied, this is more of a spiritual approach, a practical approach. You know that I like the spiritual and practical approach. I want it to mean something, not that I could just think about it with my own head. I want it to mean something that I could apply it tonight, tomorrow, whatever, this weekend. I could try to tell my friends about it, my family about it. I feel like that's an important part to learning Torah, which it is. And I was looking for an answer that would be more practical, and oh boy, did I find an answer. So I'm going to take a little bit of the answer that we just mentioned on the significance of a donkey being the only non-kosher animal that has real mention in the Torah regarding laws and regarding being associated with special Jewish parts in history and Jewish characters and leaders. Not that the reasoning is that the donkeys assisted in leaving Egypt, which is true also, but it's coming to show us the following answer, that the idea of the donkey and what it represents specifically, being the one that carried with Abraham, Moses, and God willing Mashiach, has such a vital lesson in our day-to-day lives, and in general, not just our day-to-day lives, in the way that the world and history constructed itself to get to the point where we are today. And we bring multiple proofs from this little episode of Bilam, the story of the donkey and Bilam. Don't forget about that. So the word chamar, which is the Hebrew word for donkey, is the same root and similar to the word chaymer. Chaymer means labor, physicality. It really connotes, when you think about chaymer, you think about physicality. That's what the word represents. And what we're going to go through now and explain and expound on is that this idea that a donkey represents the way that we deal with physicality in this world, which is so relevant and literally a huge part of our day-to-day lives, is not just the way we deal with it in our every waking moment of personally, but how the world learned and to deal with this idea of physicality and the part that it plays in the goal of the reason why Hashem created the world, and that is to make a dir b'tachtonim, to make a dwelling place for God in this world. Fascinating stuff. And I hope everyone's with me. I can't see anybody. Don't worry, I'm not asking anyone to turn on their screens. I just hope everyone's with me, because it would be a shame if I was being unclear. So hopefully everyone's with me. I apologize if I was not being clear. But even if you're just tuning in, anything that we learned before was just a prelude to this fascinating insight, which stands on its own. So let's talk about a second and go over the three eras in Jewish history where we find the donkeys. Era number one was Avram Avinu. Avram Avinu, and the story was of the donkey takes place in the year 1948 BC, or whatever the word is, 1948 from the year of creation, or Avram was born maybe in the year 1948. Yeah, I think Avram was born. Avram is born in the year 1948, basically before the year 2000, and we know that the world is separated into three stages: the first 2,000 years, the middle 2,000 years, and ultimately the last 2,000 years. And we know that Mashiach is going to come by the year 6th millennium. That's what it says. So Avram is the beginning. The start of it all represents the start of the world, the way the world's forming, creation, humanity, before the giving of the Torah. Then comes the middle 2,000 years, the era of giving of the Torah, which is highlighted by the leader Moshe. And then we have the last 2,000 years, which is the way the world takes Torah and culminates this whole idea of dwelling place for God, which is highlighted by the leader, which will be Mashiach. So the way that the donkey is the animal that each of these three major leaders in their times rides on, and the Torah specifically makes a point to mention that they were riding on it, represents the evolution of what the donkey represents, which is physicality, in the way that it has progressed within our world, without our history, to getting to us to this point. On a further level, we're going to now read into what each person used the donkey for. It says in the text that Avram didn't ride the donkey. He didn't ride Isaac on the donkey. It says he saddled the donkey. He saddled the donkey, and the Medrash explains, or Rashi explains, that he used the donkey to schlep the different materials that were necessary to build the altar. Moshe, it says that he used the donkey specifically, not for himself, but he put his wife and his children on the donkey. And Mashiach, it says that Mashiach himself would ride the donkey. So now if you think about it, it's a little bit of an evolution in regards to stages. First, there's no human being. Abraham or Isaac are not going on the donkey. We'll get into what that means. Then you have Moses himself not going on the donkey, but his cherished wife and children, people that mean a lot to him, that he has a relationship with, he puts them on the donkey, and we'll get into what that means. And then we get to the third stage where Mashiach himself, the leader himself, is the one that goes on the donkey. And do not think that this is just a coincidence. It is intentional for the following reason. In regards to our relationship with physicality, the animal side of us, the animal soul within us, physical desire, without maybe too much learning on the Chassidic approach, if you look at it maybe on the core value, it's pretty black and white. There's the animal soul within us, there's the divine soul within us. The animal soul, although not inherently bad, but represents physicality, distractions, which end up causing negative things. And the divine soul is the good guy. The divine soul represents godliness, represents spirituality. It's bad versus good. We're fighting. Some days with good winds, some days bad winds. But if you study a little bit deeper, and we go through the way that a person has the ability to work on themselves, we find that the above is not true. Physicality is not there to distract. It's not there to distract somebody from doing the mission at hand. Opposite. Physicality is an integral component in fulfilling what Hashem wants from us, and that is to create a dwelling for Hashem down here. And we'll talk about the three stages. Stage number one is the way that a person identifies their animal soul and physicality in the fact that they're on this spiritual journey, but they have this physical part of them and this animal soul that pipes up time to time, and they have to schlep it along for the ride. It doesn't actually, the physicality, the animal soul is not used for anything spiritual whatsoever. It's just a nuisance. It's something that was introduced to give us distraction. And unfortunately, it has to be schlepped on our personal journeys and growth as we attach ourselves closer to God. That's the way, that's kind of how it starts, which it does correlate to Abraham himself not being on the donkey, however, schlepping the material needed to build the altar. Level number two. The more you study, the more you learn, the more older you get with experience, you realize that you actually have a relationship with the physical part of you. You're able to control it. You're able to tame it. You're able to talk to it. You're able to deal with it. It's still there and it still bothers you. And a lot of the times you wish it didn't exist whatsoever. But nonetheless, you realize this idea of self-control, of maturity, of being able to harness the spiritual power, that you're able to deal. You have this real relationship going on. It's not just being schlepped along for the ride. You're able to influence yourself and in turn the physical part of you for good. It's a back and forth battle, but there's a relationship that goes on. And this kind of correlates to the fact that Moses himself didn't travel on the donkey, However, he put his wife and his kids, cherished possessions, people that he had a genuine relationship, on the donkey. Stage 2. And this brings us to stage 3. Mashiach. The idea of Mashiach and the culmination of the way that the world is orchestrated, where the world's going to be a place where the harmony is going to be so apparent. The true definition of why God created this world is going to be so, that's what it came for, is the idea and the realization that it's not physicality is there and exists in our lives to be schlepped along for the ride. And it's not that physicality is there and it's a part of your life, and but we're able to deal with it and have a relationship, and that's the beauty of the battle, it's the beauty of the growth, it's the beauty of the progress. Mashiach represents a time where physicality and spirituality are harmonious, or fused together, that the physicality not drags, but the physicality carries the spirituality inside of us in our relationship to God. That the spiritual nature within us and the physical parts of our bodies are so in tune, or so connected, or so aware of godliness and the way that the entire world is God, that we work harmonious together with. There's no distraction. There's no physical being a distraction. Our bodies are used 100%. There's this alignment. There's this harmonious, perfect moment where it's completely aligned to do the will of God, which is what Mashiach represents, an harmonious time. What was Bilam's problem? And this is highlighted and proven with Bilam's problem. Bilam's problem was that he was on a level that he thought that physicality, and this is again a metaphor, but his idea of physicality was that it's a part of our lives, and we have to give it credibility. When physicality, when the nefesh of Bahamas, the donkey, arises and starts talking with inside of us, the chamor, the donkey, physicality, when it's starting to talk to us, you have to pay attention to it. So much so you have to lower yourself to it to have you have to lower yourself to have a relationship. We know that we quoted the Talmud before that says that Bilam, in fact, had a relationship with his donkey, a physical relationship, which expresses this idea and proves that what we talked about in the evolution of transitioning from physical to spiritual, that Bilam couldn't lose sight of the fact that physicality exists, which we find a lot in our day-to-day lives. Sometimes there are those days and times in our lives where we give too much credibility to the physicality. We lower ourselves to it. We say, excuse ourselves to it. We say, you know what? This part of my life, I'm not going to develop so much. I'm not going to focus so much on transitioning in my spiritual nature, because this is where the Yetzer Hara, this is where the evil inclination is strong by me. It's strong by me, so therefore I'm going to focus my energies on places where the Yetzer Hara is weak. Absolutely not. That's what Balaam did. Balaam said, I'm stupid to physicality. I'm going to lower myself to physicality. We learn from Balaam the opposite. You have to do whatever it takes, hard or not hard, to transform that every part of your physical being. And how do we know this? How do we know that physicality's desire is not to bring you down and schlep you down to it? The real physicality desire is level 3 of wanting to be completely harmonious with the spiritual side of you in order for the physicality itself to serve God in a complete manner. How do we know? Because who saw the angel? In the story of Bilam that we read, who saw the angel? Did Bilam see the angel? Of course he didn't see the angel. Why would he see the angel? He's so focused on the chamar, he's so focused on the donkey and the physical that it represents. The donkey himself saw the angel, because at the end of the day, physicality in our day-to-day lives are not meant, it happens to drag us down sometimes, but it's not meant to drag us down. It's not its existence for in itself. The physicality inside of us is dying to be on stage 3, which is where a time where spirituality is so infused that it's able to serve God. Not just that, it will help the spiritual part of you serve God. Like the famous example is of a child that is misbehaving. not listening. So you have all these, well-educated people that are coming up with different reasonings that the child is not listening and not behaving and trauma, and I'm not saying that they're wrong, but it's the premise. The premise is the child have an issue, or is the child trying to tell you something? Is the child telling me, I'm dying for something more, help me achieve more? Or is the child telling you, I'm suffering, help me, I'm suffering? No, that's suffering. And again, obviously, to every generalization, I understand that there are those that suffer, and I'm not trying to generalize it, but I'm talking about, certain times. A child is not really acting up and not really misbehaving because there's some sort of issue. It's because there's a desire, and he just can't say the words, to achieve something greater, wanting to help see something greater. And if you see the three figures in the three different eras of history, Avram, Moshe, Mashiach, they represent times in the world that correlate to the stage where a person is dealing with their physicality. Let me explain. Avram was before Torah. The world was not ready. We know that what happened by the giving of the Torah created, we know that the heavens came down to earth and the earth went up to the heavens. Spirituality and physicality were able to connect. Before the Torah was given, physicality was very, very not something a person was able to have this relationship with. Physicality seemed to be a part of the ride, the way God created the world. It schlepped along for the ride. So Avram, he didn't go on the donkey, he just have it schlep the utensils. But Moshe, which was a time period of where this phenomenon of relationship with spirituality and physicality came through the giving of the Torah, that's the point where the world was ready to have this idea of relationship between spirituality and physicality. And in turn, a person, the second stage of their development is where they're able to fuse the two. To relate to the two. And the Mashiach's a time where not just the Torah is able to be, where the Torah is given, where spirituality and physicality were fused together, but a culmination of the idea of perfection where they're one, not the way that heaven sees they're one, but where the physical sees that it's one, which correlates to Mashiach himself riding on the donkey, because it's done, it's complete. Physicality and spirituality are fused together. Now, to kind of summarize and end off, I know we're going to end off a little bit early, but you could have some questions or just not. The idea is so unbelievable, and it shows how God structured the world intentionally to create. We couldn't have a person able to be on the level of Mashiach before stage 1 and stage 2. There would be no gradual growth. There would be no general outline for the world, for human beings to take. They would be completely all over the place. It would be too much expectation to be dealt with. And if you weren't at 100, then you might as well be to 0, because it doesn't feel good. But when we look at the story of the donkey, not just in this week's Parasha, but throughout history of the Torah, and the way that the different leaders in their different times and what those times represent that we just finished discussing, we realize, and it proves even more this idea, that Hashem and creation and Torah is intentional. There's stages. Hashem showed us their stages. Stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, not just in our day-to-day lives we have stages, but the world itself had to have these stages in order for things to kind of gradually calm to get to the point of Mashiach. Can't just be Mashiach today, tomorrow, boom, done. But when we're talking now on Zoom in the generation of Mashiach, it's a whole different ballgame. In the times of Avram, in the times of Moshe, Mashiach wasn't necessarily attainable at that time, because they were stage 1 or they were stage 2. But for our generation, that we're on the cusp, we're right there. And the Rebbe said it many, many, many times, the Mashiach is just waiting at the doorstep, waiting this idea, this phenomenon, this discussion that we just had about sourced in Torah through the idea of a donkey, that everything was orchestrated intentionally for this moment, is so relevant to our lives because we're here. The world experienced stage 1. The world experienced stage 2, and the world is in the process and ready to experience stage 3. That just tells us more and more. That gives us more confidence that we're able to experience stage 1, and we're able to experience stage 2. And if we do stage 1 to stage 2, naturally, God willing, what's going to happen is with the coming of Mashiach, we're going to be able to get to stage 3. And that's why this is such a crazy, crazy idea, crazy phenomenon. You think you're reading the story of the Torah, Parasha Balak, Balaam riding on a donkey. The donkey speaks. It's an interesting story, but let's carry on. Let's get to the part where he starts cursing. No. The donkey, the story, it's the whole thing. It's not just this week's Parsha, it's all the Parshas. It's the whole Torah because of what the donkey represents, not just in this Parsha, but throughout history. And this comes again from this week's Parshas Balak, because at the end of the day, the donkey seeing the angel and not Balaam himself seeing the angel is the proof to this idea. Balaam attached to physicality, wasn't able to see any spirituality, was stooped in it, went down to it, gave it credibility for itself. But Torah says the donkey saw the angel the whole time, because physicality is waiting and wanting to be a part of the program, to be a part of the game, to be a part of the journey. It's not really here to distract you. It's just the evolution, that the way that history and that God had it function in order that when we get to the level of spiritual perfection, of Mashiach, we appreciate it, we earned it, we deserved it, and we could appreciate the growth and the journey that comes with it. What do you guys think? Is that just not part? I want some feedback. Is that just a totally, was it too complicated? Was I too fast? Was I not clear? Dennis, what do you think, Dennis? I can't hear you.
I'm sorry. No, I found it quite interesting, and I really enjoyed this class, and I enjoyed your last class as well.
I appreciate. I'm looking for feedback. I gotta know.
Yeah.
I got one more, maybe two more. I think I gotta kind of, I gotta figure out the angle. My father knows the angle already. He's done it for so long.
No, it's definitely a different point of view. Definitely has left at least us seriously thinking about the connection. We see where you were going with it. We understand it, and in many ways agree with it.
But Rabbi, I had a question on this.
Sure.
How come? God talks to people who are high-level people. He doesn't just talk to anybody, because to be a prophet, you got to be somebody, milumad, a learned person, an honest person, a decent person. Bilam wasn't a decent person if he was involved in bestiality. How does that work?
Are you asking questions on God, or you're wondering?
No, I'm not. God forbid. I'm not.
First of all, if I'm not mistaken, Bilam was a prophet. I don't know if at that, meaning he was a good guy. Let's get to the history of Bilam. Let's see this. History of Bilam. If I'm not mistaken, Bilam, before he got stooped in idol worship, he was on the ball. He was a good guy. He was a prophet. Let me see. Prophet Bilam. David Schneider might be able to tell you more.
I know that after this instance, he loses his prophecy.
Right. Let's see. It's a good question. I'm not saying I know the answer, but I'm going to try to find the answer. We have a few more minutes. Let's see who he was.
Jacob lost his prophecy because he was sad, and right. There's no comparison to what Bilam did to being sad. There's two different levels, obviously, of doing stuff. I'm not comparing the two. I'm just saying, because Bilam was already doing these things before he was on the road with the donkey.
Right.
And he was already a prophet at that point. How does he get to become a prophet?
It's a good question. Maybe it's orchestrated as part of the story. Maybe it was, at that point where Jewish people were, asserting themselves. God maybe made things. There's an answer. I don't know it.
I'm sure.
I'm just trying to come up with it.
Wasn't it also a point that Hashem wanted to show that not only do the Jews have prophets, but gave a prophet to somebody else, another nation?
Okay, there you go. Maybe that's an idea. Maybe that's an idea. It's a good question. Yes, and anyone could ask.
I've got a question.
Yes.
I was wondering why is it that Balaam has such a close relationship with Hashem? It seems like even after the fact, it's like he calls Hashem my God.
Right.
Am I right or wrong?
No, if I'm not mistaken, I'm trying to find the exact history of Balaam. But if I'm not mistaken, he was someone that, don't get me wrong, he veered off the path a little bit, but he was a devoted person. He was a good guy. He gets distracted a little bit. He gets caught up in the wrong things. But if I'm not mistaken, he was a pretty good guy. And you know what? Maybe Hashem saw something very great with him, and Hashem attached himself to Balaam. Hashem speaks to him and convinces him not to curse because maybe Hashem had a different plan for him or had potential for him. But we know that every person is given free choice. So maybe, Hashem tried interfering with his free choice a little bit in the end. Could be. But if I'm not mistaken, before this episode takes place or around this episode takes place, Balaam was a very, very, there was nothing wrong with him. I don't have the exact answer. The question of Balaam, I don't have, but I could just something where I recall learning something about him being, an important figure, a connected person that made a mistake or that got convinced out of the right doing things. He attached himself to physicality pretty much.
I have a question.
Yes.
I just put my hands. So, is it kosher for Jewish people to get a blessing from such a powerful person, especially with some details that you told us today?
So again, it's all rooted in the same question. The question that everyone wants to know is, what was so special about Balak? That's the question that everyone wants to know. How could we get blessing from him? How could he be a prophet? So on and so forth. The answer to everyone's question is the same. Who was Balaam? What made him so unique? And you know what? Just give me a minute. Let's see. Bear with me. One second. No one's giving me what I'm looking for. Last attempt for now, and then it's just gonna have to be. Last attempt. 1 second. It doesn't say why. It just, the Medrashim explain, and I'm quoting. Balaam is a prophet of God, a human being with a live connection with the Holy One, blessed be he. He's a prophet of God. Even though he was a Gentile, but it's not the first time that Gentiles take a prominent position and of leadership and power. We know that Jethro, even though at the time he wasn't Jewish, but he has influences on Moses' decision making. It doesn't give me, but it doesn't clarify all the questions. But why? Look, I mean, I'm gonna have to dig into a little bit more. Maybe we'll have the answer at the beginning of next class, God willing. I'm sure my father could shed some light on the matter. But basically, for whatever reason, this Gentile that has strong prophecy and a strong connection to God, it doesn't say that only Jews have connections. We know that Gentiles have connection to God, but why does he take such a prominent role in giving people blessing and having a connection? Why was he able to, even though he was attached to definitely evil things? Right? I'm not going to even attempt to make up an answer. That's the truth. We'll see you next week.
I have a question.
Sure.
Can you take one more? Okay.
Yes.
Is there any story about King David and a donkey?
Are you asking because you know one, or you're asking?
I'm surprised there isn't one.
Ваня, тебя видно. Прячь все дальше. Ну ты сзади меня теперь.
Not that I recall.
Все, уже не видно.
It says that Mashiach, which we know is Mashiach ben David, it will ride in on, but King David himself, I'm not sure.
Okay.
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you.
All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next week, Bezrat Hashem.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you for the class.